It's my pleasure to talk to you about what has been called the Matrix, the indispensable condition of every other freedom in the U.S. Bill of Rights. The First Amendment, our blueprint for personal liberty, is the first 45 words of the U.S. Bill of Rights. Remember, the United States Constitution was ratified in September of 1787. But when the Founding Fathers created the United States Constitution, they didn't add a Bill of Rights. That actually led to a significant dispute between the Federalists and the so-called Anti-Federalists. There are many people who would not support the United States Constitution unless there were specific provisions providing protection for individual liberty. Ultimately, on December 15th, 1791, the Fathers ratified the U.S. Bill of Rights. And the very first 45 words of the U.S. Bill of Rights represents the First Amendment. The First Amendment itself consists of 45 words. It reads, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances." These 45 words contain 5 textually based freedoms: freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, and freedom of petition. The first 16 words deal with religion. There are 2 religious liberty clauses in the First Amendment. The first 10 words of the First Amendment, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion," represent the so-called Establishment Clause. It's the part of the First Amendment that provides for a degree of separation between church and state. This is a very disputed aspect and controversial aspect of the First Amendment. There are lawsuits, for example, challenging the fact that we have "In God We Trust" in our money, or the placement of a Ten Commandments monument on public property. The Free Exercise Clause is the second religious liberty clause. It's the one that gives us absolute protection for freedom of belief, but does not give us absolute protection for religiously inspired belief that may conflict with a generally applicable health, safety, or welfare law. The next clause is the Freedom of Speech Clause, the subject of this audio series. The important thing to remember is that freedom of speech encompasses far more than just the printed word or verbal speech. It encompasses a great deal of so-called symbolic speech and expressive conduct. Freedom of the press is a separate freedom in the First Amendment. A lot of the leading free speech controversies involve battles between competing newspapers who would advocate different political positions during the founding era. Freedom of assembly is also a cognate right of freedom of speech. Sometimes the First Amendment gets judged by the shabby contemporary company that it keeps. We think about the First Amendment protecting the flag burner, or the hate monger, or the tobacco advertiser. But the reality is that the First Amendment has been an important tool for the galvanization of social progress. If we think about the women's suffrage movement of the 19-teens and the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s, freedom of assembly was absolutely essential for those developments. The last freedom, which is sometimes forgotten, is the freedom of petition. And the freedom of petition is really important. If we think about it, the Declaration of Independence was a petition to King George III. The Magna Carta of 1215 was a petition to King John. People have the right to petition the government for a redress of grievances.
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it at no cost, thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.